Tuning into AWANI tonight with me, Saraya Mia. The specter of GE-15 looms, all eyes on UMNO meeting tonight. And Putin announces annexation of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions. That and more coming up. Hours have passed since the all-important UMNO Supreme Council meeting began earlier today. However, we're still waiting for the outcome of the meeting. Earlier today, the UMNO's top 5 leaders met before the party's Supreme Council meeting. The top 5 refers to President Datuk Sri Ahmad Zahid Hamidi, Deputy President Datuk Sri Muhammad Hassan, and Vice Presidents Datuk Sri Muhammad Khalid Nordin, Datuk Sri Mazhar Khalid, and Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob. It was reported that Muhammad, through his social media pages, had said that the top 5 leaders have reached a consensus for the party moving forward. However, he did not explain in detail about what the consensus entails. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob has ordered immediate investigations against the allegations made by former Attorney General Tan Sri Tommy Thomas in his memoir. He says this is based on a report by the Special Task Force probing the matter, which was presented to the Cabinet today. Ismail said the task force identified 4 main issues of concern in the book. This includes allegations against the judiciary, disclosure of classified government information, seditious statements, as well as abuse of power and professional negligence. Investigations will be conducted under the Official Secrets Act, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Act, and Sections 1241 and 203A of the Penal Code. Thomas was appointed AG during the Pakatan Harapan administration and served from June 2018 to February 2020. His book, titled My Story, Justice in the Wilderness, was published in January last year, sparking over 100 police reports against him. Malaysia will take legal action to stop the latest attempt by the self-claimed Sulu heirs to seize Malaysian assets in the Netherlands. De facto Law Minister Datuk Sri Dr. Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar said this in response to the group's intention to ask a Dutch court for permission to seize Malaysian assets in the country, including Petronas. Wan Junaidi also clarified that Petronas assets are not assets belonging to the government of Malaysia, and it would be an abuse of the process of any court to seek enforcement against such assets. The Sulu heirs are targeting Malaysian assets overseas following the government's refusal to recognize a $15 billion arbitration award by a French court in February, in which Malaysia did not participate and deem it as illegal. Malaysia obtained a stay on the ruling pending an appeal. In a statement, Wan Junaidi said this latest attempt by the group in the Netherlands is nothing more than yet another opportunistic act perpetrated in breach and contravention of international arbitration rules and norms under the New York Convention and the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. Wan Junaidi reiterated that Malaysia will spare no expense in defending its sovereignty and its assets abroad wherever they may be situated. He said that Malaysia has also taken court proceedings in France and Spain to set aside and render null once and for all the award by the French court, which he deemed impugned. 174 Malaysian job scam victims are still stranded in foreign countries. According to Bukit Aman, the police received 224 reports from family members and friends of these scammed victims from 2021 up to this month. Out of that number, 110 victims were rescued and brought back to Malaysia. Police Secretary Datuk Nursia Muhammad Saduddin in a statement gave an assurance that Bukit Aman will continue to use all channels and work with external agencies like ASEANPol and Interpol to extinguish these job scam syndicates. Malaysia is among several countries whose citizens have been lured by offers of lucrative jobs abroad, only to find themselves turned into modern-day slaves and subject to beatings and death threats if they refuse the syndicate's demands. Last week, Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob agreed to set up a committee to tackle the issue of Malaysians falling victim to job scams abroad. This was following the death of a job scam victim, 23-year-old Goy Cheng Feng from Ipoh. He was found to have died in a hospital in Thailand near the Myanmar border last April. He sustained severe injuries suspected to have been inflicted by the scammers. In a report by UNICEF, some 100,000 children in Malaysia could be victims of online sexual exploitation and abuse. Andrea Varela from Expat International, an anti-child trafficking and exploitation group, says Malaysia can do a lot more to strengthen legislation and close the legal gap in children's protection from sexual abuse online.
What we see from disrupting harm as one of the ways to disrupt harm and to address this issue is actually to provide additional financial resources to the ordinary courts so that they all have the same level of child-friendly measures in a systematic way, but also to increase the number of special courts for child sexual offenses. And this also goes back to the fact that these special courts on child sexual offenses come from a very important piece of legislation in the Malaysian context, which is the Sexual Offences Against Children Act from 2017. What we found, though, in our research is that there are not many prosecution of offenders under this under this Sexual Offences Against Children Act, because in many cases, offenders are actually trialed under other pieces of legislation, other provision, including the provision of the Penal Code against homosexuality. This means that then there are more difficulties for the children to have their case heard in the special courts because it's not necessarily automatically considered to be a case of online child sexual exploitation and abuse.
She urges more awareness of the Sexual Offences Against Children Act 2017, alongside education and training for legal practitioners. Andrea also highlighted provisions in the Act to be improved so that efforts to combat online child sexual abuse can be carried out more effectively.
The Sexual Offences Against Children Act criminalizes very comprehensively child sexual abuse material. So child sexual abuse material is any type of material which includes child sexual abuse. And the Sexual Offences Act Against Children in Malaysia criminalizes incredibly comprehensively, I want to say. So it includes visual material, but also audio material, written material, and so on. It also includes some provision that refer to another phenomenon, which is called, we call it online grooming. And in Malaysia is referred to as sexual communication with a child. So it's not exactly the same, but online grooming can be charged under this act. What we saw that was somehow missing in this act when it comes to the criminalization of OXEA, of online child sexual exploitation and abuse, is first around the concept of live streaming of child sexual abuse. So this is child sexual abuse which is live streamed online through a computer or another device. And so there is no storage. It's never stored on a file, on an image, or on a video, or so on. And what we say from Disrupting Harm is that either there needs to be a distinct provision criminalizing live streaming of child sexual abuse, or the provision on child sexual abuse material, which currently in Malaysia are used also in this case, need to say explicitly that this also applies when the material and the child sexual abuse is not actually stored anywhere. There is no material.
Is the government prepared to provide support and services for the growing number of people affected by dementia, both patients and caregivers? On Consider This, we ask our guests about the need for a national level plan on dementia. We'll take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin has formally announced the annexation of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions at a grand ceremony this evening, escalating his 7-month war and taking it into an unpredictable new phase. He claims the incorporation of the 4 regions into Russia is the choice of millions of people who share a common history with the Russian Federation. Russia does not fully control any of the 4 areas, which makes up nearly a fifth of Ukraine. Ukraine as well as the West have repeatedly denounced a referendum held to annex the regions as illegitimate. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has also warned that Putin's plan marks a dangerous escalation that would jeopardize the prospects for the peace in the region, and that any decision to proceed with the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. The Kremlin had said attacks against parts of Ukraine that Putin announced to annex would be considered aggression against Russia itself. Russia had already seized the Crimea Peninsula from Ukraine in 2014 and declared it part of Russia. Meanwhile, a suicide bomber has attacked a tutoring center in the Afghan capital, Kabul, killing at least 23 people. Meanwhile, 36 others were wounded in the blast earlier today. The attack took place at an education center where students were taking a mock university entrance exam. It is a private college that teaches both male and female students at a time when most girls' schools in the country remain closed since the Taliban returned to power last year. Many of those living in the area are from the Hazara ethnic minority, which have long faced persecution from both the militant Islamic State group and the Taliban. The Taliban has declared it is attempting to restore stability, but attacks by IS have continued. Last year, a bomb attack on a girls' school in the same area killed at least 85 people, many of whom were students, and wounded hundreds more. No organization has taken responsibility of the attack so far. Thailand's Constitutional Court ruled Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has not exceeded his 8-year limit to hold the post. This means Prayut, who was suspended since August 24th, can now return to the job he held since 2014.
The judges reasoned that Prayut's term did not officially begin until the military-backed constitution came into effect in April 2017. By that measure, he would be allowed to serve until 2025 if he is returned to office after the next general election, set to take place next year. The ruling comes after opposition parties filed a petition with the court last month, arguing that Prayut has served as Prime Minister beyond the constitutionally mandated 8 years. The former army chief was suspended from his duties as the court deliberated the case, during which Prawit Wongsuwan served as acting Prime Minister.
The Australian government has voiced rejection on the ruling by Myanmar against Australian economist Sean Turnell, who was sentenced to 3 years jail for violating the country's secrecy laws. In a press conference today, Foreign Minister Penny Wong also reiterated the call for his immediate release.
We do not accept the charges against him and make the point that Professor Turnell has spent years of his life working to improve the economic conditions for the people of Myanmar. We will continue to take every opportunity to advocate strongly for him until he is returned to his family in Australia.
Wong added that the government did not know where Turnell was currently being held. She said Australia had sought access to the court but was not permitted by the Myanmar authorities. Turnell was sentenced to 3 years in prison yesterday, along with former leader Aung San Suu Kyi, for breaching Myanmar's Official Secrets Act. He was also convicted of violating immigration law, for which he was given another 3-year sentence to be served concurrently.
Meanwhile, Australia will end mandatory COVID isolation requirements from next month. Currently, anyone who tests positive for the virus must isolate for 5 days, but that will end from October 14th.
The decision to let COVID-infected Australians decide whether they need to isolate or not removes one of the country's last remaining restrictions from the pandemic era. It comes about a month after the quarantine period was cut to 5 days from 7. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the country is moving towards a policy that reduces reliance on government intervention. The pandemic leave payments for casual workers will also stop when isolation rules end. Albanese said it isn't sustainable for the government to pay people's wages forever. Australia doctors, however, warned that ending the mandatory quarantine rules puts the public at risk.
Now that is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Saraya Mia, and we'll see you again in the next episode.
Jika anda mendapati wujudnya salah laku oleh peniaga, Salurkan aduan menerusi tindakan berikut. Melayari portal dan email kepada iaduan@kpdnhcp.gov.my. Menghubungi talian 1-800-886-800. Menggunakan aplikasi telefon pintar Easy Adu. Berhubung menerusi talian WhatsApp berikut. Atau anda boleh juga